When is the most free that I've ever felt with my hair? I have to say, after I did the big chop.
Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're back with part 3 of natural hair representation through the decades. So this is the final part of the docu-series. So far I've chronicled natural hair representation throughout the decades in my last 2 previous videos. In part 1 we chronicled the 60s and the 70s. Part 2 we went through the 80s and the 90s. And today we're going over the 2000s and the 2010s. The previous videos will be linked in the description box below if you have not checked them out already. Go ahead and check them out and then come back to this one. So I feel like the 2000s wasn't that long ago, but in all actuality, it really was. So let's go back in time a little bit. In July of 2000, Venus Williams becomes the first black woman to win the women's single title at Wimbledon since Althea Gibson in 1957 and 1958. That's an amazing accomplishment. Do you see the time gap? Since 1957 and 1958, and Venus Williams came and snatched the crown in 2000. So that was a big, big thing because it had been such a long time. So when she won, she was sporting a form of micro braids with curls at the end. So micro braids were these braids that I feel like Brandy really made popular. It was like getting your hair braided at like the root of your hair and only braiding it halfway and then kind of wearing the braiding hair throughout the rest. So I feel like Brandy really popularized that style in like mainstream media and entertainment. So as you can see, braids were still very much in heavy rotation at that time. And I think braids will forever be in style and in heavy rotation in our culture. In the same month of July, in the same year of 2000, Jill Scott released her debut album, Who is Jill Scott? Words and Sounds Volume 1, and it spawned so many hits. Jill Scott was always someone I looked at and looked at their hair and was like so intrigued by it. I remember growing up, I was like, wow, like that's so different. She's so cool. I really loved her music, and I felt like Jill Scott at the time was just so, I don't know, it was just something so much about her that I love. And now that I'm older, I just know that I connected with her. And so Jill Scott was always someone who has been a major source of inspiration for me personally. In most of the videos, Jilly from Philly is rocking her natural hair. So in her video for A Long Walk, she's wearing a fro. You're here, I'm pleased, I really dig your company. In the Way video, she's wearing twists. So Jill Scott was definitely someone who rocked her natural hair proudly. And like I said, I was really in awe of her growing up. In 2001, India Ari released her debut album, Acoustic Soul. One of the singles from that album was Brown Skin. And in the video, India was wearing locks. So dreadlocks became another popular hairstyle during this time. Many musical artists were donning their locks. So dreadlocks is something I've always been super familiar with. My biological father had dreadlocks, so I've always felt some kind of tie to them. And obviously dreadlocks aren't anything new to our culture or our community, but I felt like in the early 2000s it was really, really, really popular. You had people like Little John sporting his dreadlocks in the early 2000s. Little John was like one of like the head honchos of the ATL when it came to like crunk music. So he really came out with his dreadlocks. Lil Wayne at the time was also someone who was, starting his lock journey in the early 2000s. I remember looking at the video for Go DJ and I was like, okay, the locks is like sprouting and they were short at the time but growing, and I just thought like, how cool. So Lil Wayne was also someone who was starting his lock journey in the early 2000s. So dreadlocks wasn't nothing new to our culture, but it gained much popularity. Another important key to natural hair in the early 2000s was definitely Alicia Keys. I can't make this video without mentioning Alicia Keys because Alicia Keys moved the culture. And what I mean by that is Alicia Keys came on the scene with her braids, and she has so many different braiding styles that I remember begging and pleading with my mom to do my hair like hers. So Alicia Keys definitely moved the culture with her amazing braided styles. I remember like watching all of her videos and being like, wow, like that's so cool, that's so dope, like I want that. And I just thought that she was like the coolest. Macy Gray was also someone who rocked her natural hair a lot. Macy Gray to me doesn't get much credit as she should. Macy Gray is amazing. She's an amazing talent. and her hair has always been natural every time that I've seen her for the most part. And so I felt like she also played a huge role in the natural hair community or movement progressing in the early 2000s. She was known for her afro pretty much. In 2006, the Baltimore Police Department prohibits cornrows, dreadlocks, and twists to not be worn by their staffers. They considered the styles extreme and a fad. So I really wanted to add this in here because I really wanted to show you that what I talked about in my previous videos were still going on in the early 2000s. So you can see that they were still banning these styles that we wear as, black women and black people. They were banning them because they thought they were extreme or fad. And I'm still trying to figure out what's extreme about them and what's a fad about them. Dreadlocks, braids, and twists have been around for centuries, so I'm so confused about it being a fad. But, I really wanted to add this just to show y'all, like, this was still happening. So around 2009, the shade side look becomes super popular. So who remembers the shaved side look? Because I do. I remember girls were like cutting their hair like that. And yeah, it was a time. People like Rihanna and Cassie made this style very popular. I remember everyone like wanted to do the shaved side look, and I'm like, wow, like this is really taking off. I really wanted to mention this because I felt like at the time this was a style that really took on a life of its own. So as you can see, the 2000s were filled with so much natural hair inspiration. You had so many people in the early 2000s that were wearing some form of natural hair that the inspiration was literally endless. So I feel like the 2010s era is such a great time for natural hair and really embracing your natural hair texture. And if I'm talking about the early 2010s and the natural hair movement, I have to talk about Solange, because Solange was such a major influence for this to start happening. If you guys remember back when Solange first cut her hair, she cut it pretty much almost bald. And I remember like thinking like, what is she doing? And as her hair started growing, I was like, wow, like that's so cool. So we all remember back when she cut her hair and then began to wear her natural texture. I remember looking at pictures of her and being so in awe of how beautiful she looked. I remember like saying like, wow, like this is so beautiful. Erykah Badu was still one of the pioneers of the natural hair movement for the new generation. Erykah has worn many, many, many different natural hairstyles during this time. I had to mention the mother because she's always changing the game and repping for us. So around this time, natural hair became super popular. There were so many people who wore their natural hair. It became such a huge movement for women embracing their natural hair texture. Around 2011 is when I started my own personal natural hair journey because I was so inspired to do so by watching hours and hours of YouTube content. And I did eventually start my transition journey, and then I eventually big chopped my hair in 2013. So natural hair has come a long way since the 60s. I feel like so many people rock their natural hair today, and it's because so many people who came before us rock their hair proudly. I can't mention today without mentioning back then. The natural hair movement has taken on a life of its own, and it's really inspiring to see so many women and men free and rocking all different styles. Natural hair is beautiful, and doing these videos, it really helped me to realize how far we've come with natural hair and how it went from being this political statement to this fashion statement to all of these different kind of styles in the 80s and 90s. And now we're in 2019, and everywhere I turn, I see someone natural. And I love that. So this is the last video in the docu-series about natural hair throughout the decades. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this series. I hope it has given you inspiration or maybe educated you on some things you may not have known as well. I put so much love, effort, and time into this series, and that's why the videos were so far apart and spread out. I apologize for that, but these videos took a lot of time, research, effort to put it together. So I hope that you were able to feel the love through these videos. I will have part 1 and part 2 of this series linked down below, like I mentioned earlier. Please share this video and the other videos. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe if you are not already. And I'll see you guys in my next video, okay?